Welcome to Unfixed. This podcast explores the intersection of artificial intelligence and the institution of higher education. I am Zach Justice, Professor of Communication Studies and Director of Faculty Development.
I am Nik Janos, Professor of Sociology.
We are employees of Chico State and we will discuss some of our work, but this podcast is not affiliated with Chico State and the views expressed here are not representative of the university. Unfixed is just part of our portfolio. Check out our writing at meltsintoair.org and subscribe to our twice-a-month newsletter where we run down the top AI news stories and connect them to higher education.
Zach, how are you doing today?
I am doing good. I always love being in the studio with Jamie, and today Jamie's not here just as a producer.
No, she's not. She's here as a guest.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Jamie Gunderson is an associate professor of special education in the School of Education at California State University, Chico, where she coordinates the education specialist and dual credential programs and teaches across the special education curriculum. Her research centers on the implementation of universal design for learning in higher education. Prior to her university appointment, Jamie had accumulated decades of experience in the field of special education, serving as a paraprofessional classroom teacher, assistant technologist, and administrator. Jamie, welcome to this side of the microphone on Unfixed.
Thank you for having me. That bio makes me sound like I'm old.
It does.
It's only been 5 years.
Yeah, wow, decades.
Okay, so the first question and topic we're going to talk about is from your work with future teachers, what are you seeing and how they're encountering or making sense of AI as they prepare to enter the classroom?
Yeah, so I think it'll be interesting to give you a little context on the different types of teachers I work with and kind of speak to a little bit of what I'm seeing in both those realms. So I mainly work with pre-service educators, so those are students who are becoming teachers. So they're out in the field either doing a residency or they're doing student teaching or they're an intern, but essentially they're under kind of the direction of a mentor teacher. So in my field, especially in my role as coordinator, I also work with the teachers who are mentors, who are out in the field, many of them who have decades of experience. And so I work with kind of both folks. So what I'm seeing with my students who I teach, so these are my students going into the teaching field, is they're a little nervous about AI use. I think mostly because just from conversations I've had with them, there's not a lot of rules about that use, what constitutes, good AI use, ethical AI use, and what doesn't. That's a little gray. Another thing I'm seeing is that when I'm asking them, so I teach the technology course, when I'm asking them to actively use AI to, modify their lessons or anything that they're creating within the class, they're a little hesitant to do that too. And I kind of have to, I think in my last announcement, I actually had to beg them, please use your AI tools provided through Chico State to just get practice. So I'm seeing a little hesitation on the side of pre-service educators. And then out in the field, I'm seeing a lot of adoption of Magic School AI. So these are district selected programs that I don't think the classroom teachers have a lot of buy-in or input. And along with that goes not a lot of, implementation or use of those tools because there's probably not a lot of time to figure out, okay, well, how do I use this tool? And, once I figure out how to use this tool, what actually can I use this tool for within my classroom or teaching practice? And so it's weird because traditionally, and especially in my space with assistive technology and technology and education in general, we see this rapid adoption of let's say the iPad in 2010 when the iPad came out. It was literally in classrooms without any research to support that it works or not. It was in the classrooms and kind of rapidly adopted. Okay, that fast forward, now we have grow your own or bring your own device initiatives. So this is interesting because it's not following that same pattern. And so that's kind of unique to my personal experience.
Yeah, I totally think that AI has come in at a point where there's high skepticism across the people in the country and the world about new technology products and their disruption, and a lot more skepticism of the hype and its potential. But what I'm hearing though is that there's still this Wild West kind of uh, lack, this sort of normlessness that there's no clear guidance about like what is, like you said, ethical and unethical. And to me that also has its dangers as well, because it sounds like people are cautious, like, oh, I don't want to use it because I don't want to get in trouble. But it also means that on the other hand, there's people who could just be like, I do everything with it and no one will ever know, or whatever that happens to be, right? Or just like our cases where the teachers decide unilaterally to just have our kids use it in the classroom without any conversation or consent with parents or anything like that.
Well, I think I can speak from my own like teaching, in that when I'm talking to educators about how to use the tools, I'm also trying to figure out like what are the rules and how do I make decisions. And so what I've kind of always told myself is just that like I'm the decider of my lesson, I'm the decider of my materials. AI can help me think through it, but it's not something that I would lean on, right? And so I'm trying to figure that out in my teaching and kind of like share that with my students. But I'm also teaching the technology class in a time where 3 years ago I didn't even have a module on AI. It wasn't something that we talked about. It definitely wasn't really in classrooms. It wasn't something I was having to prepare my educators for. But now we're shifting and it's here. So I feel like it's kind of my responsibility as the person who kind of talks to them about AI to figure out what those rules are. And I don't have a lot to kind of, back myself up on those things. I mean, I have a few frameworks, I have a few set of standards, there's some like, great information out there, but when I'm figuring out how to like take all that information and to deduce it to what my students who are going out in the field can actually implement, I feel like there's more time needed and more consideration needed to really make that clear for students.
It seems like an incredible opportunity, but also perhaps responsibility for education departments across the country that have teaching credential programs. That's the site of training the new teachers, the norms, the ethics, the application, the skills. That's amazing, but also a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like it's like assistive technology, right? Like, so my goal with teaching my students about different types of assistive technology equipment, so these are specialized technologies for students with different types of disabilities, is always from the lens of like, I don't want them to be in the field and have a student come in with this certain device and be nervous or scared or not approach it with like, I got this, I can figure this out, I'm going to help this student. I want them to have a mindset of like, hey, I've seen this before, I have some experience that I can draw on, and I know that I have the skills to figure this out, right? And so that's I think what's most important to me to teach them within my technology class. And the only way to do that is through practice and iteration and having like conversations about how are you using it? What are your questions? Where I hit obstacles is when I have folks or colleagues who, are, I'm telling them to use AI. And then I have colleagues who are saying that, we're completely no AI use, which I have my reservations about. And so there is this lens of like, well, I'm doing something wrong. And so those are conversations I have to have within my own department.
For sure.
And so that's where I kind of think my lens is.
So, Jamie, this is an interesting connection. I hadn't thought about this before, but Nik and I have had lots of conversations, including with others when we've talked about K-12 on the podcast, about what do we need to think about for the students that are going to be here 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And we're thinking about that from a college perspective, but there's even more pressure on people like you because you're trying to equip people to have the right conversations with people like Nik's daughter, with my daughter, so that then 7 years from now when they're in college, they are going to have that ethical framework. And that is a more pressure than I really kind of processed through. So I'm super empathetic to that. We've kind of talked about where some of the gaps are with how we're preparing current teachers, but I am curious, and you and I did some work on this in the fall. What sort of gaps do you think exist, and what do we need to do for teachers that are in the classroom right now, maybe have been teaching for 10, 15 years? is there a role that universities have to play for those folks? What is it that they need to know? I always think about this. We teach in a rural area. I'm from a very rural area, and I always think about like these people in these little pockets of Northern California and different areas of the country, oftentimes without a lot of resources, without proximity to a big campus. Like, what do we need to be doing for these people that are teaching in Concow and Los Molinos?
Yeah, so I think so that was a big question, and I'm going to kind of break it into two parts. So the first part I want to stress is just kind of like, what is it about AI that we need to be focusing on? And I think in education, I see two areas where we really need to focus. So accuracy, right? Like, is what you're creating, is what you're sharing with students, is that the most accurate information? Have you double checked that? Have you vetted it? Is there a citation? You know, not just taking like what's created, like if your prompt is like, hey, come up with a lesson for third graders focused on a certain standard in digital citizenship. You know, you don't want to just have that spit something out to you and you're like, okay, that's good. You want to have, you know, you're the teacher, you're kind of responsible for the knowledge that you're sharing. So we have to make sure that the knowledge that we're sharing is accurate. So that's one area that I see a big focus for. The other lens I'm really trying to push my students to think about is AI has a bias problem, right? And so, and there's a great piece I can kind of send you that you can reference in the show notes that kind of talks about this. And when I come from the lens of like special education, I'm working with some of our most extensive support needs that are out there. And so they're not often represented in curriculum, in even stories. You don't see a lot of kids using AAC devices or things like that. So that's very specific, but the larger context is that like that's not the only voice missing. That's not the only perspective missing. So the other piece I try to teach my students is like, okay, now you're vetting it for accuracy, but also vet it for equity. Like, are people's perspectives represented? Are you just providing one kind of lens or one opinion, and are there more to kind of think about? And so I always try to get my students to think from those two perspectives, and I think that helps, you know, kind of gives us a compass to kind of figure out, you know, without a map, where we're going, if you will.
Yeah. What about the second part of that was about continuing education for teachers in the classroom? Because I just mentioned that we can train the new generation, which is great, a great opportunity. But there's millions, I guess, of teachers already who've been there 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, who have all sorts of knowledge and opinions about AI and might also be befuddled, intimidated, or nervous about it.
Well, thanks for getting me back on track, because I kind of spaced on the second part of that question. But and this kind of ties into the work that Zach and I and a lot of our colleagues at Chico State have been working on. And this has been really good work, because I think the thing that we need to do is to teach about AI, right? And so there's a lot of opportunities for, let's say, educators who have been in the field for a long time to seek out professional development for credit and such. And I think providing information, like one of the things we did is we're creating a Canvas, an asynchronous course for educators to go through to learn about AI, to see how those tools can be benefits for their classroom, their students, their assessments, their activities, and so on and so forth. So I think, you know, getting that information out there, coming up with a standard set of like, this is how we use it, AI in education, here are some considerations to think about. All that work is happening. It's just not at the forefront yet. So right now, I think, you know, the answer is really like what we're doing. We're pushing out this asynchronous Canvas module that was created by people who are in the field of education, you know, doing this work with students. And so we're here to just kind of share this knowledge. Now, that's not to say that the knowledge that we have is correct and true and right, and it may evolve over time, but at least we can start there by like, if you're a teacher and you want to know more about AI, here's a resource that you know was written by teachers, so it's really applicable to like your day-to-day.
Yeah.
I'm actually a little bit more optimistic about our ability to backfill some of this in K-12 environments than I am in higher education environments. And it's because K-12 educators in most community college districts have a continuing educational requirement, right? Like, you do need to regularly go back, learn some stuff. And oftentimes it's pretty loose about what it is that you're going to do. But there is an avenue there where you can imagine people continuing to develop skills and learn about new things in a way that if we have a colleague at Chico State or any other university that's been here for 20 years, there's no mechanism that we have in place that can require them really to do anything.
To do anything, right? Yeah, no, that is a really good point. My wife's school teacher, so the 3 decades skilling of experience. So I know a bit about the world of that. You're absolutely right on that. I think the challenges are also institutional and governance, because how principals and school districts develop dispositions and encourage this kind of conversation is going to be really important, because to put all the work on the teachers is a lot of work, and they have a lot of professional development they have to do, but at the same time they've got so much responsibility with teaching our kids and doing everything else that it's another cognitive burden. That's one of the reasons at universities we don't want to deal with it, because it is a lot of work, right? So I still think that there's that's outside the scope of our conversation here. That's really important around how schools are run and like how things are given space to do this.
Well, and I want to and this is not where the conversation's going to go, but it was just I was out at a school district just the other day having a conversation about, just how can the university be a better supporter of your district and meet some of those needs. And one of the things that came up, obviously, AI was a topic, but it was a new kind of perspective that I hadn't heard before. And the person I was speaking with kind of alluded to the fact that now parents are using AI to write these like really intense letters. I want these things from my students, and citing like different types of ed codes. So now teachers or district administrators are also receiving these letters, which kind of spark a little anxiety because of the way that they're written. But now that this information is out there and accessible, parents have access to find this information, look this up. So I think that kind of just gives it kind of an example of how AI is going to disrupt things that we haven't even thought about yet in different ways, especially in education, because it's so dynamic, it's so variable. And so we're just going to kind of find these little disruptions along the way. So what can we teach our teachers now to kind of, manage what they can manage, right?
Yeah. So any principals or superintendents, please support and help your teachers through this.
Yes.
I know we need to move on to the next question. But Jamie, that's such a depressing example. When you started that, I thought you were going to talk about something that I found myself doing, which is sometimes Evie will have homework, and it'll be math homework, and they want them to do it in a particular way. And that's not how my brain works. I've done a lot of math in my life. And there have been 1 or 2 times when I've taken a picture of the math page and uploaded it to ChatGPT. Not because I couldn't figure out the answer, but because I was like, how can I explain this in a way that's going to be consistent with how they're asking her to learn math? Right? So I was almost using it as like a translation device. And when you started doing that, when you started explaining that, I was thinking like, oh yeah, it has sort of unlocked some different help perspectives, but I guess instead we're just using it to intimidate school district with quasi-legal angry letters.
And this could be very, very small, examples from a very small sample size. I'm not sure, but now that it's out there, I'm sure.
I doubt if that's an isolated incident.
Yeah. Well, let's pivot a little bit here. I know you've done a lot of work with universal design for learning, which is actually something my colleagues in sociology we do a lot with, and have adopted a lot of that for our curriculum and course design. How does UDL intersect with AI? Does it expand access, complicated, or both?
So I think UDL is always going to be about providing flexible options, right? AI, and there was a time, a decade ago where we used to kind of tie UDL and ed tech kind of up together, and we really had to take and be mindful about ed tech's a medium through which we can provide these flexibilities outlined in UDL, but that's not the use of technology is not solely UDL. So that's an example, and I think that's what we're seeing here. But what I'm kind of excited about is, UDL is always going to be about supporting those flexible pathways. AI is giving teachers the tools to now make those pathways and to make them a lot faster, more efficient, more effective, to tailor them to individual students and their needs. And I can provide an example. So I told you I teach the technology class for teachers, and one of our big assignments, we use Notebook LM, and it's provided through Chico State. And I'm having my students create their own social stories. So, for example, when I was in the classroom and I taught students with like autism or intellectual disabilities, we were trying to teach them a new social skill, like let's say, paying for a meal out at a restaurant. Well, normally I'd have to like go out and kind of figure out each process, and I'd have to come up with like a story, and then each time we would practice, we would read that story. Well, now, if I'm a teacher, I can take a picture of the student. I can say like, create me a social story for brushing your teeth with this student. And now it's boom. And it doesn't take me 20 minutes or the whole weekend to put something together. And so what helps is now I can create a repertoire of social stories, for different things pretty immediately versus before, where I'd have to be at home on Saturday kind of cutting and pasting and putting all that together. So what we're able to offer and how quickly we're able to offer it and how we're able to individualize and to provide those different access points, I think is really exciting with AI. But it's not UDL. It's just kind of a way that we can, enhance our implementation of UDL.
No, I completely agree. This has been inspirational for the redesign in my mostly asynchronous classes, but following the UDL principles of flexible learning, AI is a really good tool for that.
Yeah.
So for my theory classes, when they're reading really dense, heavy theory, I have them do like a chat conversation with Karl Marx or Emile Durkheim or something, where it approximates like you're talking to the theorists and you get to ask them questions, and it's a low stakes assignment. But my students who are struggling, they can take one path with their questions. Students who are feeling really confident, they'll take their own path, which is to ask really complicated or more historical questions or really get into the weeds with it, right? And so that has become a really good study tool for them along the way of other aspects of their learning. And so I've done that a lot throughout my classes to join some of the uniqueness of AI chatbots, which is build your own adventure.
Yeah.
Which no other technology we've ever had does that other than talking to a human being, right? And so I have seen where those two worlds can kind of meet between UDL and AI.
Yeah, and like even something as simple, so that's a higher ed example, so I'll take it all the way down to like a special education example. Let's say I'm trying to work with a student who is really fixated on dinosaurs, and I can't really get them to engage unless I'm talking about dinosaurs. And let's say I want to, create some sort of like math lesson with word problems. Well, I can now use AI to just very quickly be like, adjust this worksheet or this word problem to, be focused on dinosaurs. And that simple thing, it actually engages like the student, and we can talk, I won't get into like where in the brain that is happening. But that's really important, because if students can have a little choice, if they can have a little engagement, they have buy-in there. Yeah. And what UDL is really just a framework of things we know in work for learning. It's in the evidence across not only students with disabilities, but students without disabilities, students in TK, all the way through higher ed. So UDL is a playbook of what we know works for learning. AI just allows us kind of the opportunity to think, okay, well, here's what I know works. How can I deliver a new way of teaching my student?
Some of them are really novel, like that weren't possible before.
Yeah.
And that's something that's not really talked a lot about in the AI discourse, is like what new things can it do for us in our teaching, whether it's kids or university students.
I feel like AI makes me a better teacher. I'm just able to like be more creative, give more examples, just things I hadn't thought about, or maybe I just didn't have time. Oh, that's really great. I want to make a student guide for that assessment. Yeah. Well, I don't have time, right? Yeah. So AI can, give it a few prompts, always, iterating, remembering that I'm the final decision maker on my design, and voila, I can have this out. And now I even have the time to get feedback from my students on those things. And I have the time to actually like go forth and say, oh, based on their feedback, I want to adjust this. Yeah. That wasn't something I really had time for.
Right. That is so cool, Jamie. And I'm so glad that you brought it to a positive. Too often, Nick and I are worried that we're descending into like this doom spiral about so much of this. But to hear you say that you feel like it makes you a better teacher and some of the avenues that opens up. It's really, we need more of that in the AI discourse.
Yeah.
And the dinosaur example hits home. It's a little bit different, but the only way I can get Nik to do any work is to frame it in terms of Transformers.
Yeah,
Sometimes
I've
I have
heard
to do
this.
the Optimus Prime voice to get him to finish a blog post.
If you could see our studio, it's like all his figurines,
Yeah.
like up.
Yeah.
It's like bingo, good luck markers.
Yeah. Well, Nik, Bumblebee wants us to wrap this episode up, okay? Jamie, I'm going to put you on the spot here with our final question about teacher education. And this is a little bit different than how we planned it, but I'm going to ask you to really sort of zoom out about what it needs to change with teacher education itself to respond for the future. But I'm going to ask you to be specific. I'm going to say you've got 30 seconds with people that are running schools of education and teacher training across the country. What's your elevator pitch to them? What do they need to do right now in order to move those programs forward?
I think we need to rethink a lot in education, and we need to tie that thinking and our action to how we know the brain works. There's so much we have learned about the brain, and we can really capitalize on education if we really understand those processes. If we're designing lessons, activities, assessments, school protocols, disciplinary procedures, while thinking about like the student's development. Gone are the days of just traditional, this is the curriculum, here are the standards, here's the test. I think we're kind of in a space where we really kind of have to think about like, what does this brain need and how can we nurture it?
Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying this podcast, please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. You can find our writing on meltsintoair.org and on LinkedIn, Zach Justice and Nik Janos. Find these links and more in the show notes. If you have feedback or want to share an idea, email us at unfixed@meltsintoair.org. Thank you to Jamie Gunderson for producing and editing the show.